Hi everyone, welcome to another session of the Birthday Salon. We will be chatting with Hazel. Now, Hazel wrote a very interesting article on her time at Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she had to have her entire experience cut short. When we chat with Hazel later, we are really just very curious to find out a bit more about what were some of the costs and opportunities involved for her as she negotiated this space of unpredictability and uncertainty of having her education get disrupted.
I think for me, when COVID-19 was already taking place, or rather like when the pandemic already started elsewhere in the world, I think when we were students in the US, it was still quite, it still felt very distant from us. Like we were not very aware that, COVID-19 is here right where we are. And for the most part, in the early part of the year, like January and February, we were still doing things like going for get-togethers with our friends, going on ski trips, since it was still winter that time. But it was only when the news started to report about how there was suspected cases in Massachusetts where I was. And then one day, when one of the Harvard undergrad students from Singapore, she actually sent me a message to tell me that they are all getting chased out of their student dorms. And that kind of really struck me as, why is it all of a sudden that this is happening? But and at that point in time, I think a lot of us were still thinking, this is probably just an overreaction. We all thought that maybe, they're gonna take this statement back. Or some of us actually thought, this might be just something that's going to happen over spring break. After spring break, maybe some of us can be back on campus again. So for the graduate students, we were not explicitly told that we had to leave campus, but the advisory started coming in from MFA, from the different scholarship boards in Singapore. So all of us started to be a bit, we started getting a little worried about what was happening just right in front of us. We were thinking about, like the cost and benefit analysis, right? We had to think, does it make sense for us to move right now, or should we complete our semester first? But what if the situation becomes so bad that we get stuck here with no healthcare? All our healthcare needs and stuff might not be met. And so, at that point, when I finally decided to come back to Singapore, I only had 3 days to pack up everything that I had.
Oh, wow.
And then I had to, just basically empty out my apartment and book my flights. And even the process of booking my flights was pretty crazy because at that point, we were still having classes online. We were having classes online, but we had to like while we were trying to look at flights online, right? Like Emirates and let's say like Dubai's airport, they suddenly reported that they're going to be closing the airport down. We could take the flight there, but then we're going to be stuck there. So all the flights there got cancelled, and then we had to rebook our flights. We tried to do the most straightforward direct route from the US to Singapore. So all of that while also trying to figure out land transportation, right? Like we want to find a route that would give us least exposure to other people, because we don't want to be, unnecessarily exposed to the virus or anything. And I guess, so all of that was quite a crazy period. Packing up, not being able to say bye to people, because all of that just happened quite suddenly. It was over spring break. We were all supposed to return after spring break. So there was, all of us just left. And then having to serve the SHN in Singapore was quite an experience as well. Because on top...
So if you don't mind, Hazel, if I may interrupt you for a bit before the stay home notice bit. I guess for me, I was very, very struck by just how much you have to balance, not just in your cognitive mind, but also the whole idea of uprooting, right, to a place where you called home for a while, and to balance the demands of a Harvard student, graduate student, whilst the live admin that you had to do of booking flights. Oh my gosh, like Like I'm right now, I'm just thinking, what perhaps was the hardest for you to, what was the hardest thing maybe for you to let go, given that you're going through all of this experiences at this time. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, it was all the opportunities that I had to give up almost, because I had all these plans of things that I wanted to do in the last quarter of my time there in Harvard. There were events that I was planning to go for. My calendar was booked. I was planning to visit places. I was still intending to, I had project ideas that I wanted to talk to people about. Yeah, so all of these, I think it's the thought of all these opportunities that I have to start like cancelling and deleting from my calendar that was the hardest for me.
Oh wow.
On top of the logistical bit of having to pack everything and moving back here.
I'm just thinking about the logistics because I do think that we don't consider it as much here, right? Because like Singapore's not big enough for you to warrant thinking about what routes were the least exposure.
PIE versus ECP, I think,
Correct.
this expressway.
Correct. Yeah. Because I had friends who were in similar situations where they were trying to go home, and because they didn't live somewhere, they didn't study somewhere where they weren't, they didn't study in London or in New York, which I think would have been way more accessible flight-wise. Yeah. So they were like, how to go home? Because I had a friend who was studying in Scotland, and the most common flights from Scotland home are through the Middle East. But then, like you said, the Middle East airport started closing.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think it got to a point where they had to convince the British government to fly a plane from Scotland to London so they could take the flight home, because she obviously she wasn't the only one who was there. So
okay, that's interesting. Yeah, even logistical things like trying to get rid of my bed and my mattress when I was there. The large items like the dining table and chairs. So at that point, the donation boxes were all closed. They were not taking anything. So I had to find other ways to get rid of all of these things. So thankfully, people still wanted to buy things at secondhand. So I was able to sell off those things. Yeah.
Do you reckon you would have done anything differently knowing that your time at Harvard got cut short?
I think that's a great question. But I feel like because for me, I already knew from the start that my time there was short and very limited. I think I was quite intentional about everything that I did there. I didn't try to pack my schedule with lots of things, because I knew that for me to really fully enjoy the experience and also to make the most of it, I needed my own alone time. I also needed my own rest. So I think I was able to kind of figure out a routine such that I was able to make the most of my experience there. Attending events that I wanted to go for, spending time with people who are like-minded or people who have totally different opinions, just hearing from every side of the story. Just doing all sorts of different things while also making sure that I have time to myself to, consolidate everything that was happening, not just going through the motions of life there. So even every single day when I walk over to my campus, I would be super intentional about looking at the trees around me, looking at the buildings around me, and then realizing how transient my time there was. Because especially being over there, the 4 seasons, right? You notice how quickly time passes. Because the trees, the leaves, they change colors so quickly. It's like one day everything is like orange, yellow, and red, and then the next day you are you tell yourself, no, I'll take a picture of this tree later on, when I'm back, when I'm on the way home, because right now I'm just not feeling it. I don't want to take my phone out. But when on the way back, you realize that the wind has blown and then all the leaves are gone. It's on the ground.
Wow.
So that actually really taught me to, the moment you notice something and just really make the most of it there and then, don't wait, not push things back.
Can I jump on that? I think that's a very beautiful metaphor, the metaphor of a tree that has its, that the wind blowing off these beautiful leaves, because at the heart of it all, even though the tree has no leaf, the tree is still alive, right? In that sense. Were there any opportunities of self-growth, or what do you learn about yourself through this, though difficult, but yet still potentially some life-giving time, especially with the disruptions and things like that.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson I learned was really to not try and control everything and just really adapting and taking a step back a little and trying to make the most of the situation. Well, I guess like being a teacher before this also kind of prepared me to be adaptable and act on things on the fly. So I think like at that point I could have kind of just broken down and told myself that like, look, like this is not happening. I'm not going to be able to finish up all my assignments from Singapore. I'm not going to be able to wake up at 2 a.m. for lessons. I'm not going to participate. I'm just going to sit there and I'm just going to not be present anymore. But I think at that point I told myself that this is a super important lesson for me to learn that things may not always go the way that you expected, but it's not the end of the world. And really just kind of making the most of the new situation. And there's so much, I think like I'm happy that all of this actually happened to me, because I feel like it enriched my entire year of my postgraduate education so much more than if everything was just like going so smoothly as was expected.
Hazira, go ahead. I'm currently just like confounded with this sense of this sense of like the way Hazel was framing it is like there's so much to be bitter about, but oh my gosh, there's to risk sounding a bit cliche, there's a lot of growth mindset in what she said. And so right now I'm just like putting the pieces in my mind and just wondering whether or not if I was in her shoes, whether I would react so in such a positive fashion.
Well, indeed. I guess like even having said that, right, it doesn't mean that we pretend or like we push our feelings and emotions aside. It's totally normal and fine to feel a sense of grief and loss. So I did start off feeling extremely sad. I didn't want to move. I sat, when my apartment was all packed up, I just sat on the ground and I just started to feel like, why did this have to happen to me? But I guess after a while, I just sat with my emotions. And after that whole process, I was able to kind of, like shake myself out of it and realize that I have two choices here, right? Either I continue to just wallow in my self-pity, or I can see what I can do from here. And I think there's so much that I've learned through this process, because going through the virtual learning on my own is going to help me in my job right now, preparing resources for future use online, right?
I think, I'll build on that question, that point that you made, right, about the idea that you sit with your emotions and you validate grief. In your piece, you talked a bit about the communities that your school built. So you had you had friends who like started Zoom classes, like Zumba classes, and then started like meditation spaces. So how were those communities, I guess, like, how were those communities helpful in helping you through this whole process? Because I do think like that's a very big part of it.
They were super important to me, because when I moved back here, I felt like I was so distant and far from everyone else. So we had this thing called virtual cultures, because back at the Graduate School of Education, my program actually are the unofficial owners of these cultures in the library. So we used to just sit around there, talk, catch up in between classes. So when classes move online, some of us still decided that we were gonna meet on the virtual cultures. So every Monday from 12 midnight to 1 in the morning, we would be on Zoom and like catching up as though, we were still like at the actual cultures itself. So that was really important to me, because I still felt like there was this community that we might be physically far apart, but we were still talking about ideas in education. We were catching up on each other's lives. We were still pretty much a very close-knit community.
Right. I think building on Hazira's point on cyber communities, I'm also very curious. Given that, Hazel, you have experienced this germination and this growth of cyber communities, right? What do you think are some of the crucial aspects that allows cyber communities to not just survive, but to thrive?
Yeah. I think for cyber communities to thrive, it really takes a lot of relationship building right from the start. So I think sometimes we might get too fixated on the task that we have to do. But I guess like regardless of whether it's a community online just meant for catching up with other people, or whether is it a community meant to do a certain task, right? I think at the beginning it's always important to set the space to make sure that people feel comfortable about being vulnerable. I guess it always starts, how do people start getting vulnerable? It always starts with maybe one or two people getting vulnerable first before, you know, you start to get the ball rolling, and then people are more willing to share. So I guess like in one of my classes, it was actually only a 1 week class. And what happened was that we had check-in sessions like every single morning. So for 5 days we had check-ins, but the check-ins were all pretty much focused on, it was just a very, how do I put it? The check-ins are not very intentional, I would say. So it's, yeah, how are you doing? Okay, we're all fine. Okay, so now we move on. But all of that, towards the end, we realized that people are not being very real. It was only when we started to really ask, you know, like honestly, how is everyone doing? So it started when one of us actually started to share that actually trying to find a job during this time is extremely stressful and difficult for that person. And then there were some other people who started to say the same thing. And they said like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out like housing for the next year. And I'm trying to decide if I want to move back home or do I want to stay. So yeah, when people started to become a little more real and vulnerable with the rest of the team, we actually felt like the rest of the tasks that we had to do, we could be more honest with one another rather than trying to hide behind this, you know, mask to show that everyone you're fine when you're actually not.
I think like for me, it's more of the idea of check-ins needing to be purposeful. Because I mean, I used to work as an RA, and one of the things that like one of the people in residential education used to say was that, oh, you know, you don't ask people how are you should ask people like, oh, what's up, or what's going on in your life, because when you ask how are you get a yes no answer, whereas if you ask like, oh, what's up in your life, they will have to think of something that has happened. And then I think when you know what people like, what comes to mind first, you have a better idea of like how the person is doing versus if you just ask how are you.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. I think it's also just very useful advice if you want to like check in with people that you care about instead of it just being a cursory thing.
I'm just going to push Hazel's point a little bit about vulnerability. What would maybe your response be for individuals and communities who may be a bit more resistant or reluctant to bring that sense of vulnerability into a space? Because as I hear you share all of this, I cannot help but think that underlying what you're sharing is this desire to bring your whole self to a meeting, right? To bring your whole self to this project or this task. And I'm also cognizant that there are some individuals who may compartmentalize, and maybe compartmentalizing them is part and parcel of their life, you know. So I'm just curious for you, from your point of view, why is vulnerability for you that crucial element that helps sustain not just maybe online communities, but even, you know, relationships? Yeah.
So if I were to just rephrase your question, so why is it that I find that vulnerability is so important in the kind of work that we do? I think for me, I find it personally difficult to be fully me and give my ideas to the table when I feel like I might be judged a certain way, or people here have a certain way of doing things that maybe they wouldn't appreciate the kind of ideas that I have. So I guess this works in many spaces, right? Like where people only feel like they can voice their real thoughts, especially I guess like as a teacher before, I knew that so much came out from the students when they were able to be themselves. So even if they knew that their voices were very different from their friends, right? It might be a little more controversial, their thoughts, but those are their thoughts. And then like I feel like they should be able to raise their voices, like raise their thoughts out so that everyone could kind of like think through it with them. Otherwise, they just get really angry if they are sitting with those thoughts and they feel like they are the only ones who feel this way. So I think like same thing for me. I think that if it's only when everyone at the table can feel like they can be their whole selves, that true constructive conversations can be built from there.
Yeah. Hazira, I must make a point that like it's very clear that Hazel is a educator through and through. She basically reframed my question and she rephrased my question. I love it. Yeah. On the point of educator, right, and like teaching, I'm just curious from your perspective, Hazel, when you were a postgraduate student, what do you think was some of the very clear difficulties or challenges that your professors might have felt or faced when they pivoted immediately online, you know? Yeah,
because that pivot was so sudden, and a lot of the professors are not the most technologically savvy people. It was quite scary for some of them. So I had a professor who doesn't even set up his own laptop for lectures in school on campus, right? Like someone else helps him do this. So all of a sudden he has to be all on his own, like trying to figure out Zoom and like everything. It was overwhelming, I would say, like for anyone who isn't used to doing all of this, and all of that while trying to make sure that your students are still engaged. You know, how am I going to make sure that people are still learning in such a space? Trying to grapple like technology plus that whole transition is quite difficult. Yeah, and I think even for my technologically savvy professors, some of them are also, it's their first time conducting lessons online. So it was very awkward when everyone is on mute and the professor's the only one who's talking, and then she tries to make a joke and then like all she sees are like faces with no sound. Maybe we are laughing but like she cannot hear it, and I think it's just quite like confusing for the professor at the beginning. Yeah, and I think also it was quite good that because we were, I guess, mature and really like motivated learners, that even though we knew that this was just not everyone's preferred mode of learning at that point, people were still enthusiastically trying to help the professors out in that sense. So people were still like raising their hands as they would in class. So the virtual hand raising, right? And like still contributing to class discussions. So I think it takes like both hands to clap. Both the professors and the students were trying to make it work for all of us, because we knew that we didn't have time to waste. We only had half a semester left, and we all wanted to still be learning what we were supposed to learn if COVID-19 didn't happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Were there any potential opportunities that you felt that virtual learning provided for you as a student, as say compared to a physical classroom, you know, when your professors were lecturing and teaching? Yeah.
Yeah. I think virtual learning really breaks down the artificial barriers that physical walls create. So I think if I could give one example, I was part of the Singapore Policy Journal, which was a student-led group as part of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. So I think it reminds me of one of the meetings that we were having, where we were trying to brainstorm, like we were trying to bring in an expert on a certain area, but our minds were kind of fixed on the idea of, oh, but let's think of who is in the area, who else is in the Boston area. But we didn't actually consider the fact that with technology, we can actually reach out to someone out of the Boston area easily, right? All we have to do is like get this person on Zoom or Skype or something. Yeah. So I guess now that COVID-19 has kind of forced us to rethink how we want to engage with other people, I think this breaking down the artificial barriers doesn't only apply to the higher education space, right? I guess even in Singapore's primary school, secondary school, junior college, polytechnic kind of context, there are also avenues for students from different schools to start interacting with one another. So right now, like students from school A are only interacting with their own peers, and then students from school B are only interacting among themselves. So I guess with such an avenue for, you know, like now that we have started thinking about how can we get people to interact a little more, I guess like there's so much room and opportunity for people to start getting to talk to people they don't usually talk to. Yeah, and I think like so much learning can happen there, because I can imagine like when I was a student in junior college, right, I always wondered like what a student in a different institution was thinking, or how would they feel about an issue. So for example, like in general paper classes, for example, we would have certain ideas on something, but we all come from similar education backgrounds, even maybe even similar family backgrounds. So our ideas were all similar, and there was no extra value added. Just conversing among ourselves that way. But I just imagine if we could talk to some other people from another school, another institution, then I think that whole collaborative sense making even would be so much more valuable.
One of the things that we've noticed about how you share is that you tend to reframe a lot of things that we see as challenges and see them no, really, because I think essentially what you were saying, right, about the considerations of getting a professor, being from Boston, what you said is that you remove the logistical need to think about transport or think about moving. And I think also as teachers, right, if you think about the logistics bit of doing inter-school collaborations, or it's a lot of things, right, because you have to write into different people, you have to make sure that the kids are transported there safely, then you have to book classrooms and stuff like that. But essentially, if you decide to have it online, you can just set a time, if you want to do a classroom space where they have a conversation, you just have to set a time and then have the internet connection be done. And I do think that now, because we're so used to it, it becomes a lot easier. So it's a really interesting possibility.
Yeah, that's true. And I think also for adults, so often adults are busy working, right? And then we talk about upskilling ourselves. We talk about learning beyond what you have to do for work. So a lot of times these are seminars or panel discussions that are happening maybe in the evenings or maybe even in the late afternoons. Not everyone can afford to leave work early to attend such seminars or panel discussions. But I'm just imagining with technology right now, if these things are being put available online, I guess even if it's being live streamed and not recorded, someone who could be maybe on the way home could be just plugged in and listening to it on the bus ride home or on the train ride home. Without the technology to help us with all of this, maybe the individual has to take into consideration, it's going to take me an hour to get to this venue. And at this venue, I'm not even sure from just the title if this is going to be of interest or of good use to me, for me to invest that time to actually travel all the way there. But if this was all happening online, for example, Zoom or even YouTube, then this person can decide to, I'm going to sit in for 15 minutes and see if this is working out. And if this is not actually what is interesting or important to me, then I'm just going to shut off and do something else. So you actually reduce that time that is being wasted. You don't have to travel all the way there only to realize that this is not what you wanted. That's going to make a lot more people be willing to, try out new things, I guess, and really learning from experience.
And building on that, Hazel, I think what I have in mind when you were sharing all of this is going back to the point of how virtual learning breaks down the walls, right, of traditional classrooms and learning. I'm also thinking a scenario whereby students who maybe generally sit at the back, at the physical back, right, of the classroom, now don't really have a back to basically hide behind, right? If the professor requires everybody to show their faces, you can see everybody. And I think, what you said, two hands to clap, then it becomes the professor's prerogative of sorts to really call out on individuals, right? Call out on students. And maybe that may not be as comfortable, maybe in the physical setting, but in the online setting, maybe that's the new kind of norm, that one is facing. I was just wondering whether you experienced that also when you were a student going for such virtual learning experiences.
Yeah, I think being able to see everyone's faces on Zoom was quite good. I felt I actually didn't feel too far away from everyone now that I can see and hear from you. And also, I guess the option of having the chat box or discussion board on the side really helps people who are less willing to speak out and to take up space. But having their comments on the side, they don't realize that actually those comments are valuable comments that people want to hear, but they may not be willing themselves to be taking up space during the lesson or something. But at least now this gives us another way to engage people, right? So I think for me as a learner, I was quite thankful for the fact that I had opportunities to both write my questions, my thoughts on the side, while also being able to speak with my classmates online. Face to face this way.
Right. I was just curious whether or not, Hazel, you have some potential words of encouragement or advice for some of our viewers who may be experiencing things that you have experienced, who are still undergoing this sense of like disjunct between the physical and the online spaces, where maybe their undergraduate or graduate kind of experiences has been cut short, you know, because like what Hazira said, you clearly are gifted in a way of reframing things, right? Reframing a cost into opportunities. I was wondering, maybe are there certain behavioral traits that you would recommend that students imbue and have and adopt in this situation? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess when you were saying all of that, the first thing that came to my mind was really to be patient with yourself. Don't beat yourself up because you are unproductive today. So at the beginning, while I was still trying to figure out my new routine, I had days where I was totally unproductive. I could be staring at my laptop trying to type and finish up my essay, but I would only have added maybe like 50 words to my whole paper, even though I was sitting at the computer for the entire day. Yeah, but I guess really being patient and kind with yourself and start to figure out what is working and what doesn't work for you. So there might be days where you might not be productive, then go do something else and then come back later on. And just, I think, really being patient and then trying to figure out a new routine. It takes a while because we are all so used to our old routines, right? Of like when you're doing like face-to-face interactions and actually going to school to have school, but now you're doing school from home, you're working from home, everything's from the same space. Right, everything might just be within like a 1 meter radius of everything. You know, you sleep, you eat, everything is all in that same place. It's difficult to draw the line sometimes, but I guess yeah, maybe some way to create a new routine for yourself. I guess even for some people, having a schedule might work. For some people, having an accountability partner might work. So you know, getting a good friend, a sibling, a parent, anyone who could actually be someone you talk to, you know, to even rant about how you were super unproductive, but both of you can brainstorm together, like how then are we going to make tomorrow more productive for ourselves? Maybe like start small. I'm just going to try and write like the next 2 paragraphs from my essay, something like that.
This is a comment more than a question. I feel like all my inputs have been more comments than questions. But I think the suggestion that you made, right, with regards to figuring new routines, whether it's a schedule and accountability partner, also speaks to like the different styles and preferences for how people work or learn. Because I think what we're used to hearing a lot is, oh, you know, you must make sure you have a schedule, you have to have a routine. But like clearly that doesn't work for some people. For some people, having someone else also just kind of acknowledges, I guess, that you are productive in different ways, or that you learn in different ways.
Yeah. So I think for some of my ex-students that I was speaking with, they were so used to meeting up their friends at libraries to work. So I told them to why not try and meet on Skype and kind of to make sure that you are not all just going on Skype to have a chit chat session where you're just gonna end up like talking to each other for an hour. How about you create a routine on Skype, right? Like the 4 of you that are gonna work together. How about spend the first 10 minutes catching up with each other on whatever's going on with your lives, and then take the next 20 minutes to, you know, just focus on your piece of work, what you're gonna do. Maybe another 5 minutes on like asking each other questions so that you are focused and not like talk about random other things during that 5 minutes, and then now take a 5-minute break. So like kind of, you know, figuring it out by like, maybe if you really need to work with friends, then find that compromise, you know, work with friends, but yet still be kind of like self-disciplined in a sense, where you're not just like going off and like talking about other random things for 3 hours.
Yeah, just like Hazira also, mine is less of a question and more of a comment. But I'm seeing a recurring pattern in Hazel sharing, in a sense that there is very deliberate design, right? We design certain kinds of platforms, not so much platforms, we design certain kind of experiences that we can experience through certain platforms to be able to potentially build on, not necessarily replace, the kind of physical interactions that we have, you know, in coffee shops or in cafes. Maybe like adding on to Hazel's Skype point, I thought it was very interesting that maybe instead of going to Starbucks, you know, people just go to like Skypebucks, you know, and bring their own coffee. Yeah, trademark the name. Okay. Yeah. I mean, if we were to move to the concluding parts of your sharing, I just wanted to ask, you know, I'm just putting myself in your shoes and just wondering if I had to uproot myself, fly back home with all of this things that I'm still processing, and like in your own words, still trying to make sense make these difficulties. I come home, I can't even go home. I still need to get stuck somewhere, and I still need to fulfill my duties as a student, right? But now with the added pressure of time difference, oh my goodness, how did you negotiate these difficulties, and how was it like for you?
Yeah, I think like at the risk of sounding super cliche, I was actually trying very hard to focus on the good things that were happening to me. So for example, when I was on stay home notice, I had like family and close friends who were sending me food, for example, right? Like I had yogurt, I had like Japanese food, I had things that were being sent to me while I was in that space. So while I was struggling with a lack of a proper sleep pattern, I was trying so hard to stay focused in my online classes and meetings. But then, you know, at points like that, I start to think like how blessed I am to have people that actually care for me, to even think of coming all the way down to Sentosa just to give me like things that they thought would help me feel a little better. And also I think taking time to kind of reflect on how lucky I am to be able to take a year off work to do this, something that I really enjoy, because not everyone can afford such time to, you know, just like, I'm not going to work for 1 year, I'm just going to do what I want to do. Yeah, not everybody can do that. And I guess for that 3/4 of my semester, for 3/4 of the year that I was at Harvard, it has been super fulfilling. And I really appreciate that I had that chance to go through what I went through. And so, yeah, just I think kind of appreciating and just being thankful for all that has happened and focusing a little less on the negative aspects of everything, not to kind of like, you know, pretend that it didn't exist, but just trying to refocus and think things differently.
I cannot help but feel that what you just shared, Hazel, also reminds, at least to me, the possibilities that if one is so caught up on gratitude that one has no time to feel sorry for oneself, you know. And I think I also echo what Hazira was sharing just now, but it's a question now I want to ask you, is how is it that you're able to reframe so intuitively, you know, in a society maybe, or if the dominant narrative is, you know, oh, you know, look at me, I'm so poor thing, this circumstance happened to me, and relinquish agency. I hear the opposite from you, and I think Hazira would agree. So what is it that, you know, that you can share with our viewers or listeners that maybe might imbue or develop this sense of agency and reframing that you seem to have very naturally? Yeah.
I think that's like a very deep question.
Of
I'm
course.
not sure.
Yeah. Do you expect anything less?
I don't know if I can fully answer that question. I guess knowing that like time is short and really like trying to make the most of our lives. I don't know if this is because of how I was brought up as a student at school. But I guess to me, it's like just trying to not let like society or everything that's happening be the one that is controlling how you live your life, but rather, you know, seeing yourself as this person with agency that think for yourself, like look into your own value system, your own compass, right? Like what is it that you want at the end of everything? If the world were to end tomorrow, would you regret doing what you're doing today? Stuff like that. Like these thoughts go through my mind, and because of such thoughts that go through my mind, not to be like super negative or anything to be like thinking about death and all that kind of stuff, but really it forces me to focus on what's really important, rather than, I don't want to live to, let's say when I'm 60 and then I realize like, oh, I've just lived like my entire life doing some things that are for other people, but how can I do something that is for me, while also obviously like thinking about how is this going to be impacting and contributing to people, society, everyone around me.
I echo that sentiment, and I think the phrase that came to me, Hazel, when you were sharing that is just like what you said, to risk sounding a bit morbid. I think in certain circles there's a phrase called deathbed discernment, right? So like if we were to imagine on our deathbed the choices that we were going to make or are making, whether or not that would be very different if like we were not going to be alive the next day.
Actually, as you were saying that, you reminded me, I think it was sometime when I was in secondary school, that during one of the assembly sessions, they played the song If Today Was Your Last Day by Nickelback. And then they made us reflect on like, what does this really mean to you? I think that really stuck with me, like ever since, that it kind of made me realize that, you know, we shouldn't just be like living each day so unintentionally, because time flies. Like, it's already July in 2020. This year has been crazy, but we are like at the closer towards the end of it already. Yeah. So I guess so much more time I feel needs to be built into being intentional about things that we do.
I don't remember reflecting on Nickelback when I was in secondary school. That sounds like a very interesting activity. But yeah, thank you for sharing that, you know. Just going to pass the time to Hazira to carry on this conversation, but also just Hazel, just to give you some context. I'm being very biased, but Hazira is an excellent summary person. But not that she has to summarize your points right now. It's just passing the time over to her and to hold the space. Yeah.
The thing is, I've kind of already like prepared a summary, sort of.
Okay.
Yeah. But essentially, I think and I'll just very briefly go through like the things that you shared, the things that have stood out to me personally, because summaries are biased lah. I think regardless of what we try to believe, right? But we started off this conversation by talking a bit about your experience at Harvard. So it is and the kind of like very, very short runway you had to pack up, to consider all the different logistical differences, like the different logistical considerations before moving back. But I think something that really, really came across in our conversation was the idea of challenges being turned into opportunities. So them being important lessons and learning to adapt rather than to attempt to take control of everything, and to make the most of the situation. So in relation to that, we also talked a bit about like how your classes have changed because everything's been moved online. So with the professors, one thing that you found that was an opportunity was the fact that the classrooms like no longer needed walls. So because of that, like that logistical considerations removed. So you create like more possibilities of the kind of gatherings or the kind of like conversations that you can have across like different communities. And then with regards to communities, we talked specifically about this idea of like cyber communities and virtual cultures. So them being a source of support in your transition from the States back to Singapore, and also in order for cyber communities to thrive, we talked a bit about relationship building and the idea of conscious check-ins. So knowing that you are intentional when you ask the questions, and also to have a space which is where people are comfortable being vulnerable. And I think like sticking with that point a bit, when we talked about advice that you had for students who are in similar situations, one of the things that came up was the importance of acknowledging your feelings, to really validate that grief and that sadness and the frustration, all the things that you might be missing out on, or like how your plans have been disrupted or changed. And in that process, in the process of adjusting to a new routine, to be patient and kind to yourself, and to figure out what works for you, whether it's a schedule or an accountability partner. And I think like what we concluded on is the idea of being intentional, and to consciously refocus with what you have, and to see what's important for you and what enables you to live life in the most authentic way to your existence, or what you feel is most important. Yeah.
Chris is definitely right about you being an excellent summarizer. I did not realize we spoke about so much in that 1 hour.
Yeah, completely, Hazel. I was just going to say that I think I need to do a separate birthday salon session just with Hazira, so that she can teach people how to summarize so well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is such an important skill, like in education. We can go on and on and on in classes, but like, what do you get at the end of the day? Let's just go all turn to Hazira. She would have a
Yeah. And I think for me, just to conclude this session, I thought we could conclude in a different way, because Hazira and I, we are constantly trying to iterate, improve this birthday salon process. I was wondering whether today we could end with a call to action. So what is not just the takeaway, but the tangible call to action that I would like to do moving on from this brilliant input that I received today? And so for me, the reflection point and the call to action on my part would be, we talked a lot about intentionality and agency. And I think the reflection I have is, especially when Hazira was summarizing just now, I thought, Hazel, you have a very interesting way of moderating that point of agency versus environment. So what I mean by that is, you mentioned that it is important that we see the goodness in things, we be grateful, that we have agency. Yet I also noticed that there was a point in Hazira's summary which echoed your point that we cannot control everything, which I thought was so interesting, because that is not a contradiction, but a very mature way of viewing that sense of I control as much as I can, and then I let go. So for me, I'm going to take that away and apply that to my work setting. To what extent can I push the boundary of controlling the things that I need to control and I can control and be grateful for, and what are the things that I can't? And I think that would be my biggest takeaway and call to action. Yeah. Hazira, what about you?
I think for me, it's the bit that she shared about the living an authentic existence, right? So if you essentially ensuring that every single part of what you're doing and how you are trying to see the world fits in with what you want to, with the kind of person that you want to be and the kind of life that you want to be. Because I think that it's something that I kind of feel is important, but I think I kind of overlooked. And then with the pandemic situation and kind of having to stay at home for most of the time, you are left alone with your thoughts a lot, which can go one of both ways, right? It can completely spiral. But if you sit with those emotions and then try to think about why am I feeling this way? Why is this important? How can I use this to move on in a way that is authentic to me? Then so I think for me it's to consciously do this even after this entire thing ends, to check it with myself, essentially.
Yeah, I think what both of you shared really resonates so much with me. Completely agree. And I guess to build directly on your point, Chris, about how you said that it's not so much of choosing between controlling certain things and letting go of certain things, right? It's really about both of them. It's like the moment you said that, it kind of made me feel like, how then do we decide what do we want to control and what are some of the things that we want to let go, would really go back down to what truly are your values. Because I guess it's only when you look back internally into what is important to you, what your values are, that we keep to the values, regardless of whether we decide whether we want to let go of certain things or control certain things, we hold on to the same values, but what we change are how is it that we go about living our lives, and how do we go about the how, so it's basically sticking to your why. It's still the same why, but how is it that you want to get to that why? It's kind of tied to your point, Chris, about some things I will control, some things I will let go. So it's all about changing your why, but really keeping to your why.
Thank you so much, Hazel. And with that gem of wisdom that we focus on the why and moderate the how, we have come to the end of this particular birthday salon session. So Hazira and I, we would love to thank your time, Hazel, for being so generous and so helpful in helping us reframe things in our lives. And we'll see all of you again soon in the next birthday salon session. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.